Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Tales 2025. It's a beautiful fall day today, and let's explore some exciting concepts in software engineering together. Today, I'm going to talk about how to integrate Get API in FastAPI with SQL database using SQL Model. I will show you how to run your code locally and test it out. Let's begin. In my last video, I explained how to declare FastAPI methods, how to test your code locally by visiting the docs URL. I will leave a link to that video in the description if you're interested to see. Today, let's dive deeper into declaring Get API with query parameters and integrated with SQL Model to make calls to MySQL DB. Instead of MySQL, you can integrate FastAPI with the NoSQL DB as well. Today, I'm integrating with MySQL DB. Integration with NoSQL DB will be in my future videos. Before we code it, let's look at our API signature and what input and output would look like. We have a Get API, which takes a parameter Q, where you can enter the first name and then it returns all the users. It's going to scan the DB, find all the users from the users table, and then return those values to our API response. For demo purposes, I have already created a MySQL DB and MySQL Workbench in my computer. I'm going to use them to showcase what the data that I already have in my DB. Okay, open the Workbench. I created this DB behind the scenes already for demo purposes. Before I run any query, I have to run this to use the DB. Okay, now I'm using TechTales DB and I have created a user table already. So in order to see what's the schema for this table look like, I'm going to run describe statement here. I run it and I can see my user table schema here. There is an ID field, first name and last name, and also their types are listed here. And my primary key for this table is the ID. And just to make sure what data I have, I'm going to run the select query. Okay, when I run this table select query, I can see the data that's present here. I have already inserted data into this DB before, so that's why you see the table data now. I had a user with ID 37 with the username TechTales. In order to insert that user through API, I have deleted that running the statement so that we can see the query and insertion in action from FastAPI. Okay, in order to use SQL Model, I have updated requirements.txt with SQL Model and its version as a dependency, which we can later use to install all the needed dependencies using pip install. We looked at the SQL DB table. We saw it had ID, first name and last name. So I'm creating a one-to-one mapping DB model in order to tie my model to the SQL DB schema. The way I do this is by importing my SQL model and declaring a class user and extending it from SQL model and setting the table to true. And I have provided the fields here and also used a field to identify and add more details like primary key so that we can identify ID as the primary key for this table. In order to connect to a DB, we would need a connection URL. So in my main.py file, I created a variable called connection URL where I'm providing username, password, and also the DB name. It's not a good idea to expose the username and password and other credential details directly as simple text in the URL. It's always good to either have them in your config file and do not expose it and add it to the git ignore so that it doesn't get uploaded to your GitHub, or you create a secure SSL connection so that the user will use those certificates in order to connect the DB and switch your connection URL to use that. In order to keep things simple for demo purposes, I have created a environment config file which contains the DB user and the password to connect to the DB. And now that my DB connection URL is all configured and I have all the data as part of my connection URL, I'm going to use that to create a engine. What does create engine do? Create engine is a SQL alchemy method which provides us a way to enter into the connection pool. So this is a way or an interface that's provided to us to interact with MySQL DB. And also I'm passing in echo equal to true parameter here because I want to print out all the SQL statements that I'm running for debug purposes. Sometimes we can add too much logging into the systems, and if it is a production DB, you may choose not to add this true statement, but for debugging purposes, it's a good idea to print your SQL statements and see what you're running. In addition to the create engine method, I also created a session dependency by using annotated to add more metadata, which says that anytime you see session dependency, get it from get session. In get session, I'm tying a session with engine so that anytime I want to run a query, I get a new session. Now let's look at the user's API. In order to expose the feature for the users, querying using a first name or a last name based on the string that is entered, I added a query parameter q, which is a string type, and added a session, which is the session dependency type, which is declared here, and also added a limit of the number of results that can be returned. Whenever we are building a API, which is a query on list of rows, it's always good to return a paginated API so that we don't overload the systems. In this, let's look closer at the query that I'm running. I'm saying that execute my statement in the session, and my statement is select from user table the user table that I already showed you in the MySQL DB, where user first name or the last name matches the query entered. Here it's not a fancy query that we are trying to run. It's just a brute force string exact match that we are trying to do. And I'm printing the results that I got back after running this query. I'm also passing in the limit variable that's being returned or set here. We looked at the method to query users. Now let's look at the method to create a user. Because we're going to do an insert into DB, it has to be a post method like I declared here. And then within the method, I created here a method named create user, which is taking in the user object, the object that we created here to have the first name and last name as part of the input response. And then I'm using session.add to create the user, session.commit to commit the value into the DB, and then session.refresh to run the select query and refresh these values. Now let's try to run it and see how this executes once we try to run it via terminal and also via the docs URL. Okay, the way to run the script is to trigger this command FastAPI dev.main.py. Okay, now I'm going to run this. As we see, it successfully compiled. I can go to this docs URL to see all the methods that are supported. As we can see the query users and create users. Let's try to query the user. And by clicking trying it out button, I'm going to provide month here, and I'm setting the limit to 100. Click execute. As you can see, I can see a lot of responses being returned here. And if I set the limit to 2 and click execute, I will only see 2 responses. So this is a way to paginate our response whenever we are dealing with data. When we have small number of rows in the database, it's not that big a deal. But when you have millions of rows, it's not a good idea to load all of them into the client and then do a processing. It could cause database overloading and cause client to crash. So it's a good idea to always paginate your response in that case. Now let's look at the users, create user DB. Let's click on try it out. And here I don't have to provide the ID because it's going to be auto incremented. I will say tech Tales 2025 edited. And I'm going to say, I'm going to copy this just in case so that I can query the users again and click execute. Okay, there is no response and I don't see any error. I'm assuming it worked. And I'm going to go here. I'm going to type this and click execute. Okay, it worked. And I saw this, there is a ID of 42 that got assigned to it. And now let's see what we see on the terminal. On the terminal, because we have set echo to true, we can see all the statements that are being run. Initially, when it tried to query the users, it tried to query, we can see the statement that it tried to query here. And we can see the select statement it ran. And we also can see the statement that was triggered when the insert happened and how the refresh triggered the select query again. And then when we tried to query for TechTales 2025 edited, we could see the response coming back and all the statements got printed. So that's about it. FastAPI provides simple usable interface to integrate with DB via SQL Model. Setting echo to true will help debug easily. It's always a good idea to paginate a query whenever we have search query to filter out a lot of records. Software engineering is all about having fun building user experiences. I hope you discovered something fun today. Thank you for choosing to watch my video. I will provide links to the GitHub repo in the description so that you can try out some of the code yourself. See you in my next video.